A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment is a nonprofit organization supported entirely by your donations. If you've ever enjoyed one of our podcast episodes, community, or classes, please consider making a donation of any size right now on our website at skepticspath.org. On the website, you can also find links to purchase the book based on the podcast, How to Train a Happy Mind, or join our Train a Happy Mind community that meets weekly for lectures, meditations, and discussions. I'm Scott Snibbe, and this is A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment, where we share practical ideas from Buddhism to build happier lives, stronger relationships, and a better world. Our very first podcast guest, Venerable Robina Courtin, is back in today's timely episode on how to deal with the despair and hopelessness many people feel today about war, injustice, inequity, and the environment. Venerable Robina was ordained as a Buddhist nun in the late 1970s. She's worked closely with her teachers Lama Thubten Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche to help spread Buddhist wisdom as an editorial director of Wisdom Publications, editor of Mandala magazine, executive director of Liberation Prison Project, and a lively, charismatic touring teacher of Buddhism. So Venerable Robina, it's a pleasure having you back on A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. You are our very first guest that inaugurated our interview sequence, and now we're on episode 154 or something.
Oh, wow. Amazing. I'm so delighted. Happy to be back.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm very, very happy to have you back.
Yeah, fantastic.
I wanted to ask something a little different of you than some of the guests, because today we're going to talk about despair, which is a tough topic. And I wonder, just to ground this conversation, if you would consider priming us with a short meditation.
Okay, so why don't we just attempt to steady this crazy mind of ours just for a couple of minutes? Yeah, using, this classic approach of the Buddhas of using your breath, which is this thing that happens naturally. We don't have to conjure it. And we just simply, let's just pay attention to our breath for a couple of minutes. So just have your body upright, muscles relaxed, have your eyes lightly closed, but have your eyes looking down as if you're looking along your nose. And just, yep. So now what we'll do is we'll first locate what we're going to focus on. And that's the sensation at your nostrils of the breath going in and out. So just first locate that. Take a couple of breaths and locate that sensation. It's slightly different when you go in and when you go out, but just locate that general sensation. Do that first. So what we're going to do for 2 minutes, 2 quality minutes, is we're going to think, okay, with determination, I'm going to pay attention to that sensation, to that breath. And that means no matter what happens, the sounds outside, the busy thoughts, we're going to, with this determination, just watch the breath go out and watch the breath come in. That's the job to be done. That's it. So naturally, after 3 breaths, perhaps the mind will wander. So you catch it and bring it back to the breath. That's it. That's the job. Just pay attention to the breath and breathe very nicely, very naturally, not forced. Just bring the mind back to the breath. All right. That's it. Couple of minutes. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah. I often do that when I'm teaching or giving a lecture too. So I
That's
get into the proper mood.
No, that's right. Exactly. Just steady the mind, steady it. Yep.
Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of people right now as you travel.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there's anything unique you're hearing about people's despair at this particular moment for our culture, civilization, country.
I think the first thing we need to do, we're familiar with that word. Everybody has their own take on it, their own experience of it. So what's despair saying? Well, despair is saying everything is, I'm a disaster. Life is a disaster. The husband has left me. My baby died. The house fell down. I haven't got a job. I'm homeless. Whatever the external condition might be that is triggered this feeling of despair. But then we can hear it's a hopeless voice. It's hopeless. Things are a disaster. The world looks terrible. Everything looks disaster. And then, of course, there's the main feeling of despair is you can't do anything about it. It's completely impossible. So when we know that, just theoretically, then what do we do with it? Well, we need to learn to do, using these practical techniques, is go beneath the feeling and not wait for the feeling to happen. This is the thing. We do a practice every day, then we're going to catch it and then grab it before it becomes such a strong feeling. But it's to hear what it's saying, So would you think that's true, that despair is really, if you put it down, if you write the words out, it's hopeless. Nothing's worthwhile. Everything's a disaster. I mean, what would you say? What would you think?
Yeah. It would be perceiving harmful events in the world and feeling like there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, hopelessness.
Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at the Buddhist analysis of this. The way we feel is driven by these thoughts in our mind, which initially is surprising to us because we think feelings are these powerful things we have at the level of the body, and we almost can't articulate them, So I think that this is the problem, because we don't, in our culture, and more maybe are now, we don't have techniques that enable us to pay attention to the mind at the beginning of the day, do a 5-minute technique. Mm-hmm. So then throughout the day, you're able to catch your thoughts before they get to the mouth, before they become physical feelings. And that's the real skill we have to learn. But our tragedy is we wait until it's too late. We wait till the feeling comes. I mean, the commonest question I get in people, like we're discussing the emotions. Well, when I'm angry with my boyfriend, what can I do? And that's like saying, when I see the war and I'm despairing, what can I do? Well, it's a bit late. It's a bit late then. We have to catch it first, and that's the thing. So really, Buddhist approach is all about learning to hear the thoughts and then, big surprise, change them. And this all sounds so shocking, because if you're feeling this overwhelming emotion of despair, what are you fixing? We can't imagine we can fix anything inside. We can't fix the outside world, and it feels set in stone on the inside. But that's what we have to learn to realize, is we can change our thought. Emotions are not set in stone. But I think we don't know. We can, by changing our thoughts, we can become a happy person or a less suffering person. And that's all Buddha's saying. It's the same process. It's a cognitive process. It's changing your thoughts. So then what we have to look at here is the two main problems, as far as Buddha's concerned, are attachment and aversion. But when we look at attachment, which for the Buddha is this underlying constant voice that's continuously there, and it's multifaceted, but it's key energy, and this is what drives every single being in the universe, is this constant need for everything to be nice. And attachment is quite desperate. It can't stand things that aren't nice. And what not nice means is what I don't want. My attachment does not want to see war, does not want to see ugly things happening, does not want to see terrible suffering. So the reason we suffer isn't because of the war. It's what's so hard to see, We can see there's this attachment wanting things to be nice. And the millisecond the unnice thing happens, such as the war, then anger, aversion arises. Now, this is the thing, I think. With some people, it would become volatile anger, but for other people, it's quiet. And for that person, it builds up and becomes despair, So it's aversion, basically. And the interesting point is both of these are driven by fear. They're both driven by fear, and attachment only wants the nice things, and aversion is freaking out when the unnice thing happens. So the appropriate side, of course, we all want the war to end, and that's appropriate, totally appropriate. But attachment is when that want is mixed with this needy, and sounds so kind of, I don't know, it's difficult to hear it, but we mix the reasonable wanting for the war to end, which is totally appropriate, with the attachment for the war to end. And that's the part that's very hard to see. You know, like I always think of an example of, like, I've got an alcoholic brother, you know? So on the one hand, you've got the virtue, the so-called positive quality. You love your brother, which is, may my brother be happy. You have compassion for your brother. May he not suffer. They're amazing. They're our saving grace, those qualities. But what we don't notice is it's polluted by our attachment to the brother being not an alcoholic. In other words, my attachment is upset. How dare my wretched alcoholic brother upset my apple cart, upset my life? Because that's what's happening. And that's what causes the distress. Love and compassion can't cause distress. So what I do is I stick my nose into my brother's life, trying to make him, you know, stop being an alcoholic, but it messes up my compassion. Maybe he doesn't want my advice. So it's what we have to learn to distinguish between is this unhappy, I-based, distressing attachment, neediness, and then valid love and compassion, which we can. So you have compassion for the people in the war, but the stress and the anxiety is coming from attachment. And that's hard to see, Scott, I think. But I think and this is not religion, this is just Buddhist psychology, and it's quite subtle, you know, to learn to distinguish in our own mind between a neurotic need for something to be the way I want it and a valid, appropriate, love and compassion-based, you know, need to make the world a better place. It's very hard to see the difference. And this is the key to success, I think.
Yeah, you know, and it's recognizing that kind of attachment, even if it's an attachment to the war ending, is an agitated state of mind, right? That it actually doesn't feel, and you can see that it doesn't. I see it in many of my friends around me. They're totally agitated all day long because they can't stand this reality, which there's a huge component of reasonableness too.
Yes.
But also it seems like there's sometimes people don't think they deserve to be happy if people are being, you know, bombed and killed all the way around the world. Like,
no, that's
what would you say? What would you say to that kind of person? Is it really okay to be happy while other people are suffering so much?
That's a huge point, Scott. You know, so when we become like a political activist, or we really try to make the world a better place, you know, we can't imagine doing that without being distressed and despair. The whole Buddhist approach is working on your mind means lessening attachment, lessening anger, lessening jealousy, lessening those conceptual stories. And the consequence of that, I'm sorry, we can't help it, is just naturally you'll be more happy. You can't possibly avoid it, you know, because Buddha's saying the suffering is coming from the attachment and anxiety and agitation. So you get less attached and less angry and less despairing. You can't help but become more happy, but also more compassionate and loving. And you need that. If you want to be effective on the planet, you've got to be optimistic. Not even optimistic. You've got to be grounded, and you've got to have empathy for others. And those very qualities are what make you happy. So you can't avoid happiness. It's not a self-centered happiness. That's the big difference. You know, your mind will be more relaxed. Then you've got more space for compassion and more for you know, you'll be the best political activist then. You'll be able to be of use to the world, you know. I always remember Martin Luther King when I was a radical activist in the 60s and 70s. I remember Martin Luther King used to say, it's good to find fault. It's good to be angry in the sense that there is injustice and there is racism. But instead of just raving on about it, which is what anger wants to do, he said, then you say, what can I do to help? And that's compassion, you know, and compassion is what makes you feel fulfilled. So, of course, we have to learn to be happy, but not self-centered happiness. It's a very different kind of happiness. It's a stability, a mental stability, which enables us to be empathetic. You know, I think we've got to see the difference. What do you think?
A happy activist is a compassionate activist, is an effective activist.
Exactly.
So many people, though, I know would still be arguing with you right now and say, oh, look, that didn't work. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Black rights have not been perfected in this country.
Yeah, detachment is the one that says, well, if I do this, then all the suffering will go away. No. I remember the Dalai Lama was asked by a journalist, he said, anger looks very good. It looks effective. And Dalai Lama said, I know what you mean, but if mainly what you're doing with your political activity is driven by anger, it won't last because it blows up and then collapses. And then you don't care, you know. I mean, all the people I worked with in the 60s, they're just fat and old and don't care anymore, you know. But he said, if you're driven by compassion, then you don't give up because you don't have fantasy expectations. You don't give up. You just keep going because you don't have a choice. And you are fulfilled. So you can't help but be happy if you're working on your mind like this. And of course we deserve it. It's ridiculous to think we don't deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard His Holiness say the same thing many times where people said, isn't anger motivating? If I'm not angry, how am I going to be effective? And he said, yeah, it is motivating, but it's like a drug. It has very negative side effects from, like you're talking about, burnout, but also it tends to bleed out. Like a lot of the very angry activists you see, their organization and even their relationship with their family is chaos because that anger kind of bleeds out all around them. And sometimes you see them even, into an awful downward spiral. So
yeah, that's it. But I suppose then, Scott, the real thing to do, when we say attachment in the world, we mix it with what we think of as love. So then we think we have to give up attachment. Well, we've got to give up love as well. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. So when we hear that, anger's no good, it'll only cause you suffering, you've got to give it up, we think you've got to give up critical analysis. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. But that's the massive distinction, and that's the part that's difficult. We've got to look inside to see that,
I was just with Yangtze Rinpoche. Well, you were with me. Actually, we were at the same event.
Yeah, go on.
And he said, well, there's 8 billion people in the world. So you do your best, you create the causes, but then for those causes to ripen in the world, it depends on many, many more people and events than yourself.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly right. So I think the thing is, in the end, if I look at history, we can all see there has been suffering. There have been wars. There have been dramas. There have been suffering. So we just take that reality and then know, well, what are my choices, But we first have to recognize, well, do I want to feel a bit better? Do I want to feel a bit more content and fulfilled? We have to recognize we do want that. We've got to recognize it for ourselves first. And that's one that you said that we feel ashamed to have. So we think, oh, that sounds selfish, But you've got to have that first. And then create the causes by working on your own mind, less attachment, less neurosis, more fulfillment, more contentment. And then you can say, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Look at everybody else. And now you know how to do it. So now you know how to help others. But we've got to be able to recognize that it's appropriate to want to be happy. It's totally appropriate. But this is, for some reason, we're so ashamed of that in our culture. For some reason, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're supposed to suffer. No, I know, as a friend of mine, who's a political activist, she said, I can never be happy until everybody else, if everybody else is suffering. I will not be happy, she said. And
what did you say to her? What did you say to her when she told you that?
Because it's family, I couldn't say much.
What would you say if you could?
Tried to say what I'm saying now, that when you're more happy, you can be more effective.
Yeah.
And if you want to be happy, you work on your mind first. And so you get less attached, more kind, naturally, so you'll be more content. Then you can be more effective. If you want to be effective, then there's no benefit in having a panic attack and being angry. You can't do anything. Sort of like if you panic while you're all drowning, you might as well say optimistic, then you can maybe find an opportunity to help to escape, So it's practical. It's just a practical thing for me. But it takes a while. I know in the Buddhist one how we talk about purification. And, part of the process of acknowledging your own negativity. We hear that as anger. We hear that as guilt, oh, I'm a bad person. But this is just one of our worst crimes against ourselves, We've got to realize that we cause ourselves our own suffering, but we can also cause ourselves our own happiness. And then we can help others how to do it.
Without feeling guilty about it.
That's it, yeah, totally. Guilt is one of our worst. It's ridiculous. Guilt is it's just anger against yourself, isn't it? You're saying, I did this and I did that and I'm a bad person. That's exactly what anger is. You did this and you did that and you're a bad person. And it's just not effective. It's tunnel vision.
I agree. It's ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous. And yet I've suffered from it. I know, just about everyone I know does. What do you say to someone practically who's suffering from the sense of guilt?
So the very first step in this so-called purification practice is this acknowledging, well, I did do that. I did kick the dog and badmouth my boyfriend and whatever you might have done, And so the first approach is you regret it. So the commonest thing is, as the Dalai Lama said, when someone asked, what's the difference between regret and guilt? And Dalai Lama said, well, guilt, you look in the past and you go, well, I did this and I did that and I kicked the dog and I lied. And then you go, and I'm a bad person. And then we just stay stuck in that. And that's useless. But he said, regret it. The first part's the same. I did kick the dog. I did badmouth my boyfriend. But then you say, what can I do to fix it? And that's a completely different attitude. But you've got to own the fact that your angry thoughts harm you. Just like we know sugar will harm us and cigarettes will harm you, and we don't feel guilty about it. It's practical, So to realize my anger, my depression, my anxiety, my guilt harm me, then the first step is to acknowledge that I did do this as a result, but what can I do to shift it and change it? It's optimistic. It's so optimistic, because guilt, but it's so instinctive, isn't it, Scott? I mean, the way the Buddhist analysis of ego grasping, the ego just runs. The irony of ego, we love to hate ourselves. We see ourselves as my mother used to say, you are your own worst enemy. And that's really what Buddha's saying. So it takes time though, takes time, doesn't it?
What are some of the things we learn from Buddhism, from analytical meditation, that can help us process those very disturbing emotions of anger, or the negative ones, the attached one?
Well, the bird needs two wings, isn't it? Compassion and wisdom. So as Dalai Lama says, compassion is sort of the point, but compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And that's, if, we look at the way that Buddhist practice is laid out incrementally, the first step is the wisdom wing, which is putting yourself together, seeing why you are suffering and learning to change your own suffering and program your mind in a new way. And then you're qualified to help others. So even forget the war, just stubbing your toe. Think of the tiniest thing that'll happen. One event is, my boyfriend slurps his coffee. Don't wait till the war comes, but start with the baby events. So one thing is the external event, and then second, there is my interpretation of it. All Buddha's saying is practical. If I can, stop stubbing my toe, if I can stop the boyfriend slurping his coffee, okay, that's fine. But what if I can't? So then, honey child, change your interpretation. But we've got to realize that there are these two things. We just assume stubbing your toe means, well, of course I'm angry. I stubbed my toe. Of course I'm despairing. There's a war. No, that's the point. If we can get to see one is the event and then second is your interpretation. And our job is to become familiar with the interpretation and learn to change it. And that's the source of our sanity and clarity. That's really the essence of the whole thing, but that's a very hard job because the anger arises so spontaneously because attachment is so primordial, and attachment only wants nice feelings. We all know it in our lives. We know one day you can wake up and feel fairly relaxed. So the hubby slurping his coffee doesn't worry you today, but tomorrow you want to kill him. So the event is the same, but your attitude is different. So it's the mind that we have to see. The same with war. You realize your interpretation of it, the fear, the panic. And then, of course, if you're a bit more delving deep into the Buddhist analysis, one of the things is to have the wisdom to know how to interpret, well, what is a war and why is there a war? So let's just say you're a really brilliant nurse and you and I decide to we go and work with the Doctors Without Frontiers.
Yeah, Doctors Without Borders.
We turn up at the war zone, we walk into the tent where they're doing the operations. Now, I don't even know how to put a Band-Aid on, but you've got skill. So this is what the wisdom wing is. Wisdom is knowing what's going on and how to interpret. So you're going to see the same suffering that I will, but because you know how to help, you won't have a panic attack. You'll walk in and you'll use whatever skills you've got, one person at a time, and you will try to help them. So you won't lose the plot. I will just have a panic attack and think, oh my God, this is unbearable. I don't know what to do because I don't know how to interpret it. That's what wisdom is. So, if you take the Buddhist view of karma, everybody creates their own experiences. You have this analysis and you see the suffering between the two groups of people. And then you immediately can go, oh my God, look at the result of, negative actions. Then you can learn about it yourself and then you can afford to have the compassion and that will keep you stable. So having wisdom, which is an analysis of what a problem is and why it's happening, which is the wisdom you've got as a good nurse, that keeps you sane. And then you're able to do something. You can't cure everybody in that tent, but you can do something to help one person. And that's my feeling. If the world is a disaster, and it is, you can't go tomorrow to Ukraine to fix it. You can't go to Israel or Gaza. So what do? You do what you can right now and help that one ant, that one dog, and that one next door neighbor. And that helping will give you courage as well and keep you grounded. You do what you can to help where you can. The despair is no benefit to me or anybody else, too.
Here's Annie. Annie's up here.
Hello, Annie.
When you're imagining the story playing out with what this looks like with if somebody is slurping their tea and it's really annoying, what does that look like in the process? If you were seeing it like a movie, what would it look like if somebody were to go through unpacking it being an
so I come down from breakfast and there's my boyfriend slurping his coffee. This is where practice comes in, because normally we're not noticing our thoughts. So the second the coffee comes, the slurping happens, and because anger, because attachment is in there, automatically wanting only nice things. And so aversion will instantly arise, and before you know it, the words are out the mouth and the damage is done. Whereas if you learn to practice, you catch your thoughts before it gets to the mouth. And that's when you do this cognitive process. Well, Robina, it's only slurping coffee. He's allowed to slurp his coffee. It's just your interpretation. And before, within 1 minute, if you really practice, you'll say, "Good morning, sweetheart," and won't mention it. And then the problem is solved.
In this example with your partner, when somebody's slurping coffee, you're like, "Oh, I'm not gonna say something horrible, but I'll just say that's an interpretation. I'm just irritated. It's an interpretation." And then it's like, the next step is like, I've seen over time people get resentful.
Okay, I hear your point. When we hear, "Oh, don't speak the angry words," we assume the only option is to suppress it, to keep it inside. Well, that's a disaster. We're not talking that here. This is the real skill. One is learn not to say the words, because that's going to harm somebody and harm myself. But then not just suppress it, but literally be my own therapist. That's why we have to become familiar with our thoughts. That anger is a thought. It's a thought. How dare he slurp his coffee? He knows I don't want slurping. It's anger. It's called anger. And it's because my attachment isn't getting what it wants. That's what it is. So you argue with that. It's a cognitive process. And so you practice changing your thoughts. You practice reinterpreting the slurping sound. So, I have my friends people in prison where it's a dramatic example. That's where they don't have the luxury, Well, there's one woman I always talk about, Sunny, in Florida in the 70s. She wrote a memoir. She's not a Buddhist or anything. She was accused with her husband of killing two. They were hitching in Florida and they picked up by two guys. The guys got stopped by the police. They killed the police and blamed the hippies. So they're on death row. Eventually, even the husband got executed and she went to the execution. His head burst into flames. This nightmare. She was there for 17 years in a cell on her own with a Bible. That was it. Innocent, totally innocent, enough to make people go completely insane. And this woman I so admire, especially she's such a good example because she didn't have any spiritual path. She said, "Finally, I realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me." So she said she worked out a regime of how to work with her anger and her despair and her rage. She realized that her anger and rage and despair, which in the worldly terms are totally valid, because look at the suffering. She was totally innocent. She realized that they made her crazy, and she knew she could change her thoughts. She learned yoga, and she learned her own methods of how to work on her mind and literally reinterpret her situation. This is literally what she did. This is the most dramatic example. She said, finally, I decided, well, I'm not a prisoner. I'm a monk. I am not in a cell. I'm in a cave. She dramatically did a reinterpretation of and the reality was still prison. The reality was it was unfair. They're facts. They never changed. But she radically changed her thought process. And the result of that is she came out a sane, kind, easygoing person with zero stress, zero, what do you call when one talks about traumatic stress business, because she dealt with it. She was able to change her interpretation of this external event. But she was funny, actually. She said, "I'd give myself permission to be angry for 5 minutes." So she'd scream and rage for 5 minutes, and then she would stop and go back to her internal work. She's an incredible example for me, all the more because she didn't have any spiritual particular path. She just had her own intelligence, It was astonishing for me. She blows my mind, this woman.
Yeah, and the extraordinary thing here is this, to draw this connection again that you're making, and I've heard His Holiness make, between, wars, unjust imprisonment, and being annoyed at your partner slurping
That's
tea.
right.
There is a connection, right? I've heard
That's right.
people ask His Holiness over and over again, how do we end war? And he's always said what you've said. He said, make up with the people in your life that you're
That's
angry
right.
at. And in one case, it can be, more gently, the partner who's tea slurping annoys you.
That's right.
Or more seriously, it can be the legal system that has unjustly imprisoned me and executed my partner, right? Those things are all connected.
All connected, yeah. And the thing with her was, what's interesting, this is the practical point about it. I've met many people in prison. It's a common thing because it's so dehumanizing, and you've got no space. You can't move an inch. You're treated worse than infantile. You can't make any, you're stuck in this system. You either go crazy or you kill yourself or others. And then everybody comes out with post-traumatic stress syndrome, naturally, because they haven't dealt with it. Whereas Sunny, when you meet this woman now, she's old, she's 80-something, she's in a wheelchair. She's just this happy little old lady. You would never know she had this 17 years of intense suffering because she dealt with it, And the other point is, because she was able to deal with it, she kept her sanity, and she didn't just sit back and go, oh, well, I'll be a happy person. She never stopped working on her freedom, and she got her freedom eventually because she kept her sanity. So it's practical for your own sake that she worked on her mind, and she was able still to see the injustice never changed, was still unjust, and she kept her sanity enough to work on her freedom. Whereas if you lose the plot completely, you can't lift an inch to do anything for yourself or others. This other fellow, who was also wrongly accused, and he was what we called normal, who went literally out of his brain, screaming daily as long as he had a voice, I did not rape and kill that woman. He was beyond despair. So there's the difference. Sunny was able to see that she had the ability to literally change her interpretation of this nightmare. But this other fellow, like most of us, didn't. And that's the point. So to say to a person who is despairing because the war is so terrible and their baby just died or whatever, to say that you can change your mind, to us it almost sounds cruel. What do you mean change my mind? Because we don't believe that the suffering's coming from our mind. That's our tragedy. We believe the suffering's coming from the war, the dead baby. This is so shocking for us. So it really needs incredible intelligence. Why I think about Sunny, she had this incredible emotional intelligence that from her own self, she was able to see this.
Venerable Robina, I think it'll be so helpful for listeners talking about, other specific examples. Let's talk about the environment. For many people, that's the number one, especially younger people, the number one source of despair. Talk about how we work with those feelings and how to productively turn them around without being in denial and without rage.
So when I was an old radical lefty, and in those days it wasn't the environment, it was other things, then what you do is your attachment then shifts and goes, well, now I'm going to work on changing the world. And then you start building up a fantasy that all this political activity you're doing, everything is going to change, and you visualize the miracle of in 5 years' time, everything will be perfect. Because attachment has to keep having a fantasy. So when we realize that maybe sometimes it is just too late. It's not being depressing and giving up, but maybe with the environment, certain things have got to a stage. I mean, look at the Australian Barrier Reef. It's all because of warming water. It's now all becoming bleached out. So you have to say, you can't suddenly, attachment only wants all the Great Barrier Reef to be all colourful and beautiful again. But you look at it, it is white and bleached out. That's the reality. That's the reality. So you can't change it. Sometimes you've got to accept that you just can't change something. So then what do? It's like Sunny realized she could not change that prison. So she changed her mind. And what else can you do? What else can you do? That the barrier reef is like that. So it doesn't mean you give up. It means you do what you can every tiny bit, even if it is a disaster. I mean, you don't expect a war to come, but suddenly the people in Ukraine who are going to lunch every day and suddenly now they come over to a war zone, you don't give up. You then deal with your new reality. So you get courageous, and you adjust your mind. This is the reality. This is what it is now. And you still keep doing what you can without any fantasy expectation, because attachment it has to have a fantasy. It can't be realistic, Do you understand what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Attachment is this delusion thinking that only good things should happen to me. So one of the antidotes we as Buddhists do is to constantly think it's very natural for problems to occur. And you even go into great detail thinking about them in the morning, many days that, well, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, which makes you more prepared when they actually do, right?
That's right. When you're more realistic and you see how disastrous it is, the environment is a disaster. It is terrible what's happening. It is happening. It's right there. Then you think, well, what can I do? You don't do anything. You give up. You do what you can. Even within that, you do what you can. There was Sunny in a cell for years, many of those years. She was in a cell on her own. And that was it. So she outrageously adjusted herself to deal with it in the best way she can. This is all we can do. Because the world is a suffering place, there's no question. There is racism. There is this. There is that. There is poverty. They're facts, And as to whether we have an explanation, that's Often the problem is like if I walk into that tent with you who've got wisdom of nursing and I have no wisdom, then I will panic. Why is this happening to these poor people? Oh my God, there is no reason. Then you try to find someone to blame, you know. But with the karmic view, if you take it on in a sensible way, you can own responsibility. And then you realize everybody's in the same, everybody's experiencing the fruits of our own crazy past, including all of our good things. And then we can learn to take responsibility and own it and change it. We're in charge, you know.
Yeah. And whether or not you believe in Buddhist karma, just to be clear that there are causes that brought those people into those hospital beds, that brought those countries to the brink of war, to actual war, and so on, right? The mechanism doesn't necessarily matter, but to actually recall there are causes behind all of these events occurring right now. They didn't just spring out of nothing.
And that's right. And that's why it's interesting to remember the Buddha's not a creator. He didn't make up these things. The Buddha's a person who has observed these natural, as far as he's concerned, this is a natural law that each sentient being is experiencing their own, you know, and that's a natural law. It's not religion, not a belief, not dogma. So it's a tough one to see, but I think we can see it in our own daily lives. I mean, we don't think this way, but if you learn to be a musician, what do you think you're doing? You're programming your mind into a really sophisticated mind of musical knowledge. You turn yourself into a musician. You create the musician. All Buddha's saying is we create the happy person and the suffering person. Forget past lives. If you spend every single day being anxious and angry and jealous and depressed, what the hell person do you think you're creating? Except we say, well, I'm allowed to be angry and jealous because look at the mean boyfriend. We want to point the fingers. All he's saying is have a look at your mind and realize that you're producing the person you become. That's really the point. Forget past lives and future lives. If you're kind and loving and compassionate and wise every day, you are literally producing a happy person. But we know we turn ourselves into a musician or a cook. We're happy to take responsibility, but we do not think we can turn ourselves into a happy or suffering person. We think it's everybody else. So we're kind of demented, you know. That's really the essence of karma. It's practical. It's logical. But our problem is it's sort of like you're not a good musician and you blame the piano and blame the piano teacher and it's all their fault. Because you know if you don't play piano properly, you're the one who made yourself a bad pianist and you're the one who makes yourself a good pianist. We get that when it comes to external things, but not when it comes to virtue and non-virtue, not when it comes to being a happy person and a suffering person. And all Buddha's saying is we are the one who can turn ourselves into a happy person or suffering person. We're the boss.
Venerable Robina, personal question is, are there any ways in which you still struggle with despair today?
You know, I think until we're really advanced, we're going to have these moments. We go and we swing, don't we, between everything's wonderful to, oh my God, everything's a disaster. So we can all have mini moments of being high, everything's wonderful, which is attachment getting carried away. And then when things go wrong and the thing doesn't work and the coffee's cold or the printer didn't do what you wanted or whatever, or the airplane didn't go on time, then you fall into the, oh my God, this is a disaster. So I think we have these are the two truths. We have these mini moments of over-exaggerating everything when it's lovely and under-exaggerating everything when it's bad. So they're just moments of despair and moments of happiness. And it's always going to be tinged with attachment and aversion. So I think it's there until we hardly realize it. But you just learn to navigate it more quickly and you know it'll pass, you know, or everything didn't work out. You missed your plane. There you are, midnight at the airport and your credit card doesn't work or something. So you're going to get upset, you know. I mean, I'm talking about baby example. But then as you keep practicing on this path, you get more able to manage the dramas. And so you have less despair, less aversion. And you know that tomorrow it will change. It'll be all okay when you wake up in the morning. Your mind's more flexible.
And so are you saying for yourself, these things, of course, are occurring. Your flights are late, the coffee's cold, and so on.
Life happens. Things don't happen. You don't get what you want all the time.
Yeah. But in your own life, you're saying that you'll feel that frustration, but then you can quickly apply the antidote.
Everything is just less severe than it used to be because you've been working on your mind. You're getting better at it, you know. In other words, when you start playing tennis, it's a complete disaster the first day because, you know, Federer destroyed you. But 25 years later, you did not too badly. You understand? So you get better and better at dealing with the dramas and being more flexible in your mind and not taking it all so seriously. Is with what ego takes it seriously, you know? Do you understand? So for sure, I can see progress. Yeah.
And what techniques does your mind jump to when you feel that despair, frustration in your own life? What really works for you?
It's always the analysis, impermanence, the analysis of karma, the impermanence in that case, especially impermanence. You know, your mind is, you know, you see your mind kind of get moment of, oh, this is hopeless, this is no good, this is a disaster, this is ridiculous, it didn't work the way I needed. And then you can interpret it. You realize you're grasping at it. You realize your attachment didn't get what it wanted. You welcome it. And then just by doing that, it dissipates it. So you apply all these tools. It's the analysis for me every time. It's the analysis. It's the analysis of karma, impermanence, emptiness, kindness. It's the analysis, just more and more easily applying it, and therefore more and more effective every time.
And do you feel a sense of hope and optimism for humanity?
I can't even talk that way. I never think those. I can't think like that. No, because that's implying somehow humanity is doing something to get better. But I don't think, if you think of it that way, not being rude about humanity, this group called humanity. I mean, I always try to rejoice when I see anybody doing anything good, and delight. I know one time, years ago, when I was running this liberation prison project, dealing full on with this, disaster of the prison system in this country. And I remember I went to a little conference in DC, just a half a day, and it was all these different religious groups doing what they can. They got fed up with all the fundamentalist white Christian fanatics running the show of Christianity and religion in this country. So a little group over here doing this to help poor people. Another little group of Muslims here doing this one. A small little group here doing that. So I thought anything you can do where you can, do that. And that for me is staying hopeful, staying optimistic. Because even if you're drowning, if you panic, then you can do nothing. You might as well, there's no benefit in not optimistic, meaning a fantasy. Everything is perfect in 5 years. Not having a projection like that. Just doing what you can moment by moment to help this person here, that ant there, that dog there, doing what you can and seeing what one person can do. I know at that time I read about this amazing Indian woman. Her name is Bedi, I can't think of her name. But she was given the job of running this insane nightmare of a prison in Delhi of 10,000 inmates. And she transformed it in like 2 years, like a miracle. So one person can do so much, So having that optimism too. But as for humanity, being hopeful, I don't know, whatever. I mean, until we all change, that's the point, isn't it? Until each individual person works on their own mind, the world can't be different, it can't be.
I like that. Your hope is more about action than fantasy.
Yeah, I think so. Exactly. That's exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah,
and do what you can yourself. And that brings satisfaction to you. I remember when I first met the Dharma, hearing all this insane levels of compassion that Buddhism says we can all accomplish. I thought, these people are crazy, How can you talk like bodhisattvas, having compassion for every living being and all that? It just seemed impossible. It seemed unattainable. And I remember the Dalai Lama said, if you want to help others, practice compassion. And you want to help yourself, practice compassion. Now that gave me an opportunity, that helped me understand it. Okay, good. I will be also a beneficiary. Don't be ashamed of that. How amazing, So that was helpful to me.
Thank you. Venerable Robina, you've agreed to lead a meditation that will air in the episode following this one. Could you describe a little bit what that is?
Well, in the Tibetan Buddhist system, we have all these different kind of archetypes, if you like, but images, like one behind me, there's Mr. If you look at it a bit closer, you'll see he's got a peaceful face and he's looking very friendly and peaceful. So that's an archetype of, I wouldn't mind being like that, thinking that way, And so in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there are these different images of Buddhas, male, female, all kinds, loving, compassionate, wise. There's some of fierce compassion. They're really nice archetypes of different psychological qualities that are really positive, And so the meditation I'll do will be using this female Buddha. She represents courage, action, and optimism. She knows the way she's sitting. She's not sitting in meditation pose. She's got one leg out, ready to kind of hop up to help others. She's action energy, positive action, optimism. So just a simple meditation, imagining this, we can be very broad about how we visualize it, and then imagining light coming and purifying, and it's just very uplifting. Uplifting meditations. I like them.
Well, thank you, Venerable Robina. It's a pleasure having you back on the podcast.
Well done.
And really appreciate you offering all these ways of processing and working with despair.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I rejoice in what you're doing. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for my conversation with Venerable Robina Courtin. If you've enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy my book based on our podcast's modern approach to Buddhist wisdom, How to Train a Happy Mind. You can get the book in paper, ebook, and audiobook format anywhere you buy books. If you'd like to go deeper in your meditation practice, on our website you can sign up for our newsletter and join our Train a Happy Mind community that meets weekly for lectures, meditations, and discussions. Please also consider making a donation to our podcast if you have the means. A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment is a nonprofit organization. Our podcasts and programs are free and ad-free thanks to our generous donors. To support us now, visit our website at skepticspath.org. We accept cash, credit, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies, and your donations are tax-deductible in the U.S. Thanks to Annie Nguyen for production and story editing, Christian Parry for mastering, and Isabella Acebal for marketing. We wish you a wonderful day.